Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. I know one of our participants, it's still early morning, but I'm TJ. I'm the Director of Communications and Program Operations at the Elections Group. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Elections Group is a nonpartisan election administration consulting firm. We partner with state and local election officials to implement new programs and improve processes for voters and other stakeholders. Today, we're going to be talking about election resilience, specifically how to manage communication strategies so that election offices are well positioned before, during, and after any type of crisis. I'm really excited to introduce our guests for today's conversations. For today's conversation, we have Kristin Connelly, who's the elected clerk recorder in Contra Costa County, California. We have Carolina Lopez, who's the executive director of the Partnership for Large Election Jurisdictions, or PLEJ, as it's known. And then we have Mindy Moretti, who's the editor-in-chief of electionline, longtime editor-in-chief of electionline, which is now a project of the Election Center. We're going to get started with folks' backgrounds, a little bit on how you came to this work. So let's start with Kristin.
Thanks, TJ. Hello, everybody, and good morning. Special good morning to, I see a few members from my amazing elections division in Contra Costa are on the line. So yeah, I got elected to be clerk recorder and registrar in 2022. And it was the first time in the history of our county that we had a competitive race for clerk without an incumbent. So my background is actually not in election administration as a profession. It's always been something that's been very important to me. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I attended law school in New York City just after the passage of the Help America Vote Act. Not to date myself, and so in law school, my passion was about, let's talk about how we can have safe elections that are accurate, no chads, all the things, post 2000. And so, but yeah, no, for those of you who don't know, Contra Costa County is about 30 miles east of San Francisco. We've got nearly 1.2 million residents, 722,000 registered voters, and we are a microcosm of California. And so, in all the best and most challenging ways, 19 cities and towns, and my background is mostly been in nonpartisan advocacy and governance reform. And so I just think that the work of a registrar is really important, and thought that my personality suited it. As many of you on this line know, in 2021, 2022, there were a lot of attacks on elections officials. And so I thought I had previously served as a school board member locally, and thought I could make a difference. And so our office has a long tradition of being innovative and solving problems. And actually I got to step into being a part of the inaugural cohort of the Centers for Elections Excellence. So again, to my amazing team that's on the line, you guys really set me up for big success in this role. So thanks for having me.
That's phenomenal. All right, Carolina.
Been in the election space for a little over 20 years, started when I was 5 years old, in Miami-Dade County, Florida, a little county no one's ever heard of in elections, nothing to do with hanging chads, nothing ever. All jokes aside, as a former elections administrator in the largest county in Florida, talking to peers, doing what we are doing now is not something that always existed outside of the state. And so just really thankful for the platform. And in terms of how we got here, I think back in 2011, there was a legislative change that essentially cut early voting in half in Florida. And this was right before the 2012 presidential election. That, compounded with the longest ballot in history, our voters had 6 cards, so 12-page ballot, led to historically long lines. And the next year, the legislature realized that was not the best move and changed early voting back to 2 full weeks. And that, I think, is when, PLEJ sort of became an idea in my head. If we only talked to other folks in other states, how we're navigating things could have saved us some time. And then COVID happened and the country shuts down, and literally the week after, 3 states, Illinois, Florida, and one other, still have a presidential preference primary, even with 80% of the poll workers not showing up, right? And so that again reminded me, we really did need a space where we could sort of compare best practices. In elections, we don't steal them. We do copy and paste each other's templates and operational resources. And so that's, that's how we got here. Former election administrator, liking to know how other folks do and being a super connector, and just very happy to be in the space.
That's awesome. All right, Mindy.
Well, and much like Carolina, I was about 2 years old when I started working in elections. But this November will mark 20 years at electionline. And prior to that, I was at the National Association of Counties at County News. And so I got my start writing about county elections then. I think the one big story that I wrote a bunch of them, but the one that really sticks in my mind was the special, the recall election for the governor in California. And so that was a big one that I remember. I wrote a lot about meth too, because it was counties. So, my choice after that was to either go to election line or go work at the DEA. So I chose to go to election line, and so here I am. It's been through some different homes over the years, but hopefully we're at our forever home now at the election center and doing our thing at 6 a.m. every day, and then every Thursday at noon. So this is where we are. Yep, looking forward to chatting with everybody today.
I think I speak for everybody, Mindy, when I say we're very happy you made that choice. And I'm actually going to turn to our first question, which will be to Mindy. And I do want to say, Mindy, just how happy we are to have you, because I think more than anybody, probably, you've had a long time bird's eye view on what's happening in elections. Given this webinar is about resilience as a topic, can you talk about some examples, either specifically or just in general, of offices that you've seen that do a really good job in building or fostering resilience, kind of before anything happens, when something's happening, and then afterward, just in general? Yeah.
Sure. So I think I will say this, having, like I said, having been doing the news side of elections for quite a while, literally every elections office has improved leaps and bounds from where they used to be. Some of it was just, it happened naturally, and others was they realized that they had to do it. So I think that's the big thing. I think everyone has really done an amazing job of sort of getting out on the forefront of things. Doesn't mean that there isn't still work to do, because it's easy to want to hunker down and circle the wagons, so to speak, when something happens. But I think from 2020 to 2024 really sort of pushed people forward and being more proactive. And I think that's been a good thing. And my hope is, and I'm sure it will be the case, is that using these next couple of years, because it's an off year, there are no elections in 2025 because there are only elections every 2 years. Sarcasm. But so hopefully people, but it can be a bit slower of a time, which gives people a chance to sort of work on that, and hopefully that will continue to improve between elections offices and the media. But it is leaps and bounds better than where it used to be. And I will be honest, I think a lot of the counties and cities who are administering the elections tend to be a bit more proactive sometimes than the states do. I think it's easier to track down your local county clerk than it is anyone in a Secretary of State's office. And I think that's really important, because the state folks are very involved, but at the end of the day, it is the locals who are, for the most part, other than in a couple small situations, who are the ones who are doing the work, doing the heavy lifting. So, but it's been wonderful to watch and sort of see how everyone has really sort of realized that, yes, the media is the media, but they are also there to help you too.
Yeah. I think homing in, Carolina and Kristin, drawing on your experiences as election officials, or Carolina, now with your excellent experience at PLEJ, can you share either something that you've done or something that you've seen? I think in the last 6 months, thinking about North Carolina, for example, we've seen excellent examples of resilience in really tragic circumstances. But thinking specifically about communications, are there things that you've seen that have significantly improved trust in elections?
Yeah. First of all, I will say this, following what Mindy's comment was, everyone invested in early education, right? Like pre-bunking. I can't tell you how many times, and we were pre-bunking for each other. Like I would hear individuals in states that were not Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where we would say, hey, just, setting expectations, right? On election day, don't compare Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to Florida. Florida has 22 days of pre-processing. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they have to wait till election day. So just like setting the expectation of what was to come, I think was really helpful. And everyone was one-upping each other, right? Within the state and across the country. I think the most important decision that we made at PLEJ was to do media roundtables featuring members across the country. And we did this in two ways. Number one, we did a in-person roundtable in DC where we had 8 different states join us. And it was just a room full of reporters, maybe like 30 different reporters from the Boston Globe to USA Today, NBC, all the folks that had reach. And we gave them updates on things that we thought they might want to hear. And the conversation was really positive. And our members were telling us, wow, we didn't get grilled, and I was like, because you're giving them content that they want to hear about, right? And that was helpful. And the reporters asked, well, can we do this one more time? And we're like, yeah, let's get a different cast. And we got, another 8 election officials from high visibility states. And here's what happened. At least 2 members. One was in Georgia and was impacted by bomb threats and evacuations on election day. He was in front of the news from 5 in the morning till 2 in the morning on election day, right? Almost 24 hours. And I remember sort of like lamenting and comparing notes after, and he was like, I'm glad I did those media roundtables because I sort of got the jitters out, and also I knew what they were asking. And so my sound bites were short and crisp and to the point. And he was amazing. And there was one other member who like tripled his media exposure, just by being part of these roundtables. He got better coverage for his team, better advocacy when he needs budget improvements to, scale up his operation. So like that was the best thing I think we did as a community, realizing we got to go to the news and tell people what they need to know even before they want to think about it. Yeah.
Kristin, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, building absolutely on what Carolina was just talking about with respect to pre-bunking. That was a central strategy built into the Trust in Elections campaign that we launched. So in 2023, late 2023, we had a competitive RFP to partner with a local communications firm, Brown Miller, shout out. And because we were able to use grant money, right? We don't normally have money to, the county does not give us money to do any outreach like this, but we decided that in this time, we needed to be very proactive about it. So we based ours on, we designed our campaign based on what we learned from registered voters. There were 3 surveys that we did, pre-election and pre-campaign. And we designed our campaign to not be transactional. We were trying to play the long game and have it not just be about the 2024 election, but just about how can we build trust in elections. And so we used actual registered voters in Contra Costa as, in terms of people we had, because we have, of our 700,000 plus registered voters, we have about 350-ish thousand email addresses. And so the firm worked with us to create a representative sample, oversampling for Spanish speakers and young people, kind of what our target audiences were. Because our theory was that we expected that the public would generally trust us, have a little less trust at the national level, but that there would be large swaths of demographic groups that really were mistrustful. And that, that showed in the survey data. But what we did is we were able to test different messages. And so the messages that resonated the most with people in terms of increasing their trust and knowledge, it showed us that, well, I should say, we learned that we need to show people, not tell people. And so what we did is we created a number of videos. When I'm not talking, because I can't multitask, I'll drop some links in the chat to our YouTube page that give you some examples. Because the PR firm was like, hey, Contra Costa, you got some nice long videos that people are not going to watch. And you've got a lot of text heavy content on your website. So we stood up a separate election security website because we believed, and our approach was that if we focused on all the ways that our elections are secure, that would help move the needle. And so we set up a separate website dedicated to election security. And what was great is that as this new elections official, I was able to apply this learning real time in how I talked to the media. And so, right, the key things that the most resonant messages were, we had a tagline about 2-step verification, try 48-step verification, because we'd used based on an CISA handout that we had collaborated with other Bay Area counties. You know, it was like, holy cow, if you look at every step in the process, there's a lot here. And so what we did is we really wanted to highlight just how secure, right? Another message that resonated was, we're an open book, come look. Now, thanks to my staff that's on here and all the folks that are not on here today, right? That takes a lot of work to make yourself an open book. But I think because we were telling the truth, that in fact, come on, come watch. We actually are nonpartisan in everything we do. We are happy to show you, happy to explain things. And so our technical experts in our office were incredibly patient. So so according to the PR firm, we saw a 12% increase in trust in elections among Contra Costa voters, 7% nationally, right? So more makes sense. Saw some movement in our target audiences. You know, got to be careful about causality, you know, but right, we were using the same survey instrument. And so feeling good about that. So we're going to continue to sustain this website, show not tell, and it helped me stay on message. So, you know, in all those interviews, I did not do as much as the Georgia election official. Oh, that's exhausting. But right, I just kept emphasizing, we're an open book. All of our procedures keep things safe. Oh, you have a question about this? Let me answer it. And I tend to go on and on about all kinds of subjects, but this helped me stay focused, right? So have one message at a time, put out a lot of messages, and hat tip to Dawn Kruger, our media and community relations manager, who put things out. I will also say we changed course when there was a problem, right? So it was important to us to not make ourselves, our PR firm wanted to put like, Contra Costa, you're the best. And I was like, you know what? Everywhere, elections are more secure than ever. To Mindy's point about everybody upping their game. So whether it was coming back from the National Conference for Election Center in Detroit, you know, calming my mother down to be like, Mom, whether it was an elections official from Texas or Michigan, Republicans, Democrats, we're all in on making things secure. And so, you know, and talking about legislative changes, they had 10 days in Michigan in 2024 to process vote by mail instead of 10 hours. That's important. Their stress was way down. If you're from Michigan, shout out. I hope you had a good cycle. So anyway, so those were some of the things that were key. And thanks for putting the link in the chat, TJ.
Of course, I really like the show Don't Tell, because I think we all recognize that elections are highly technical, and figuring out how to communicate that, you know, the technicality in many cases, or the level of how technical it is, serves voters and serves the process well. I mean, this isn't something that's easy to do, but thinking, this is for everybody, thinking about and understanding that sometimes you can try to be technical in hopes of increasing trust and have an opposite effect. I think of Pam Fessler, who's a communications advisor on our team, formerly worked at NPR. She'll talk about the phrase or the term logic and accuracy testing. And it is funny to think that logic and accuracy testing is you're supposed to be more confident in the election as a result of logic and accuracy testing. But I think if you don't have the context or the information for what it is, it can have the opposite effect. So just thinking about how folks are communicating this technical info. Kristin, you talked about show, don't tell. What are some practices that you're aware of, that you've seen, that you've done yourself, that are useful? And I think we can turn to Mindy to start on this one.
I always like to laugh about the logic and accuracy testing, because from the dawn of time, there's been logic and accuracy testing, and really until the last 2 years, no members of the media have paid hardly any attention to it. I mean, it's always been there. It's always been open to the public. I was thinking about this a little bit, sort of as some of the stuff I've been posting since the beginning of the year, and I really feel like there's an opportunity in 2025 if you have any sort of elections that are happening that may not work out for everyone, but if you do, whatever it's for, some of them are pretty small. It's a really great time to maybe see if a member of the media wants to come in and be a poll worker, or come in and be an observer, not to write about it, but to just learn about it, because it's too hard for them to do it in 2026 and 2028 during the primaries of the general, because they'll be working on it, but they might be able, this is something that I think they could really possibly do this year, if you have a smaller election, that they could come in and just actually, learn through doing, as opposed to just watching and that sort of thing. So this would be a really great opportunity if you have smaller scale elections this year to sort of, obviously Virginia and New Jersey have big scale elections, but if you have smaller scale elections, to see if they want to come in and be a poll worker for a day, or an observer, or help processing ballots and that sort of thing, because it's really, I think it's a great idea. That would be super helpful for folks in the coming year. The only thing I would say in the coming year too is, so much legislation. And I know that there's a fine line between being a lobbyist and doing your job, and you have to be very careful of that. But I think if there's a piece of legislation that's working through your legislature, explaining to a local reporter literally how this will impact the process for you. I mean, talk to them. Then that's not lobbying. That's just saying, this is what will happen if this passes, or if this doesn't pass. This is what happens. And I think that's really important to understand the implications of that. And there's going to be a lot of legislation this year, I think. So I think that's a really good opportunity to help reporters and the public learn about what these changes may be, and sort of the implications about that. And you can do that without lobbying, just explaining to people, showing them, and a little bit of telling in this respect too.
One of the things that came up, actually, I was in California, and I was probably standing next to like Kristin's team, and I think I was talking to Hawaii, and they're like, hey, does anybody have any notes on how you guys talk to the media about this type of bill? I know that you guys in the mainland have been dealing with this for 18 months, but it's just coming to our state now. Like, what do we need to know? And what I found very quickly was peers' ability to very quickly share. And as they were sharing things, as a community, us refining steps, whether we're talking about a bill, why it is important to have pre-processing, why it is important to have, this type of voter registration system or the other. And with the help of TJ and the elections group, we sort of summarized, these are crowdsourced, publicly available resources that we developed with the elections group, election officials across the country, whether or not they were members of PLEJ. So like, it was, what do you do when somebody puts an incendiary device on your Dropbox? Like, we didn't have that on our bingo card, but we had to very quickly update our coup planning for that, right? Or what do you do when you have to evacuate polling places on election day? And so I am just in awe at election officials' ability and willingness to share with their peers. Here's what I'm doing. What do you have? Okay, let's make our procedure stronger, because I like Mindy's idea on this, and I like Chris's idea on communications, and I like this idea. And so collectively, we now have stronger, more robust systems because we shared with each other what we're doing. And so anyway, just wanted to give a very public shout out to the elections group for being a thought partner and a thought leader in creating those resources, and so much more to come. So if you're doing something cool, share it with the elections group, share it with Kristin, share it with Mindy, share it with us at PLEJ, because there's nothing worse than starting with a blank canvas, like a white sheet of paper. I much rather have somebody's template and right size it to my organization. So thank you, elections group, for that.
Kristin, anything? There you go. Sorry.
No, it's so fun actually to work in this field because of the collaboration that Carolyn is talking about, right? I mean, and because we are sharing, right? And not every idea is going to work in every place, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, predating me, our office started this certified election observer program, right? And so where we're proactively trying to in 4 sessions, about 14 hours at our office that we do during the canvas of every, actually starting with logic and accuracy testing. I can attest when I was running for clerk recorder, the only people who cared about LNA and Contra Costa were me and my opponents. And so that is not the day we are in. So, you know, because we had dozens of people come and watch LNA, right, in this cycle. So I think it's, for me, the strategy has been, I say yes to every invitation I get. Anything that like, and I don't think that it will always be like this, right? I mean, I think that we will get back to where people sort of don't care about LNA anymore. They don't, you know, but we're not yet there yet. And so we need to be, and so, you know, I buy a lot of donuts. I try to encourage my team because we have asked all of our people who work in a public system where they're not making a lot of money. They are dealing with a lot of hard stuff. And oh yeah, there's some bomb sniffing dogs at work today. That's not normal. Most people in government do not have to deal with that. Most people in the private sector do not have to deal with that. And so I think it's important to recognize the care that our teams need to keep them going, right? So it's great to share. We're really collaborative, and we need to tell the truth about what's hard to help people keep going in those moments, right? I mean, I think that's certainly been important for me these last 2 years.
Kristin, I really like the point you made there, just that this increased interest from folks is really an opportunity, and you're seizing on that opportunity. You're not letting it go by. I know in addition to taking all of those opportunities, you're also within Contra Costa County, or in Contra Costa County, super intentional. You've talked about how you visited every municipality in Contra Costa. Can you talk about that intentionality and how valuable that is outside of the folks who are just already interested?
Right. So, you know, we only have a staff of 28 full-time elections folks. And so, actually, we are up to 30. We have 2 amazing new elections outreach specialists. We're able to get the public to step up and use some special sales tax measures to do that. So they just started after the election. We're there in week 2 with us. But so 30 staff is small. And so heading into the primary, I wanted to, because in California, we have these rules where the parties, you know, we got 3 political parties where you can cross over and vote for, you know, get a ballot for voting for president. And then we got 3 parties where you have to re-register if you're a no party preference voter. We have more no party preference voters in Contra Costa, we have about 25%, depending on the pocket of the county, than Republicans in a lot of parts of our county. And so it was really important to me to get all the help I could get so I decided to basically deputize all elected city council and town council members to be on our team so that they could use every vehicle that they had to make sure that their voters were not disenfranchised, right? And so I went to every city and town council. There were some that we were at 3 councils on like nights, right? Because you can't start too early because they won't care or know about the election, right? So we kind of in this compressed calendar. So appreciated that my deputy Tommy Gong would go place, Helen Nolan, our AROV would go, but mostly I did, and we went and they were thrilled at that outreach. They were thrilled that I thought they were important enough to be spoken to directly. We have a mayor's conference where the mayors all gather once a month in the evening. And so I went there too. And so some of these people had heard me give the kind of same spiel like 3 times before. And so, but right, repetition helps. And so, and it got them paying attention. We got them to receive our, the newsletter that we created as part of our Trust and Election campaign. Dawn in our office we started using Constant Contact to use those 350,000-ish emails so we could start emailing voters. I saw that the head of the union of my high school district that I used to be on the governing board, I saw her last night. She's like, I get your emails. You know, so I'm running into people who are in all parts of life that are now touched by our office. And my theory is that if you ask people to help, they feel part of the system, they feel better about the system, and you get help. And so, so that is something that I hope to continue to find ways to continue to engage all the elected officials so that we can, we have this small band of full-time employees, and, it expands greatly during a presidential cycle, and that's a beautiful thing to see. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot of people that we can tap to help us inform the public. Now, granted, we only had 37% turnout in our presidential primary. I felt like I had worked so hard to throw an amazing wedding that not everybody RSVP'd to. And so, but you know, you keep trying.
That's excellent. I know we touched a little bit on one of the really tremendous things about the professional election administration community being that larger professional community that I think many of us are part of or have leadership roles in. Mindy, obviously your home at the election center is the preeminent and longest serving kind of convener of election officials. Carolina, you are the supreme connector. I don't think there's anybody who does. This is my opportunity to be effusive too. So take that for what you will. Nobody who does that connecting better, Carolina. And then Kristin, I think in 2 years, it's been phenomenal to see how you've taken to the profession, how I know you're in leadership within your state association. State associations are so important to that community building. Obviously, you were a well-respected leader in the Alliance for Election Excellence, but I'm wondering, for all of the folks who aren't bought into that community or those communities, either at the state or national levels, what's your sell to them? Like, how do you describe to them the benefits, the resilience building benefits of being an active part of those communities? Anybody can go ahead.
I mean, I'm happy to take a first crack. By virtue of what PLEJ is, we are the super connector of the largest, election jurisdictions in the country, right? So you think of like the largest four in your state or anyone with a population of 250,000 or more, not registered voters, but population. So we're looking at like a universe of 400 counties or cities that account for 3/4 of the American electorate. So small group, lots of responsibility. And in terms of like being in community, if my example of having to deal with 5.5 hour wait times, or individuals that are implementing 400 legislative changes, i.e. Minnesota, they had by all accounts just really great infrastructure improvements. But in elections, you typically change one thing at a time, not 400 things, and hope to God that everything works out okay. And what I found is some people are new, some people retire, some people, the building caves in. And so now you need a new warehouse, and you now need to ask peers, hey, what does a modern warehouse look like? What are modern security things? Like, who in the world thought that, Clark County, Nevada, which is Vegas, was going to have snipers on the roof during presidential elections, right? Like, elections change and we have to change with it. And the more you connect with peers, the more you pick up, and it's not just for you, the election official, but it's like, how do you train your team? How do you train your deputy to take over? How do you train your specialist to become a manager, your manager to become a director, right? The more we share, even if it's like a 5-minute conversation at Election Center, or a webinar at TEG, or a webinar at PLEJ, or, one of the 1,000 things that we do, or a tabletop exercise with CISA, or any of those, professional development cannot be understated. And having those conversations with people just like you that get the impact that we make every day, whether you all are celebrated as you should be, as true heroes. I mean, there should be rose petals everywhere you walk, Kristin and everybody on this call, right? Just for all the things that you guys are able to overcome, whether or not there's a story written by it, right? And so my plug is, if you really want to stay ahead of the game and deliver, whether you have all the funding that you need, all the people that you need, all the time that you need to implement things, you really should talk to your peers, and not just in the state, but think outside, right? Like something that Kristin just did with her communications firm may be the difference between a new election official deciding to stay in office or saying, you know what, I'm going to go back to like collecting tax fees or anything else but this is crazy. And then we're constantly having to rebuild. So, I get a free template from a peer. Like, it's amazing. This community is resilient and very friendly and very willing to help. Whether you have a hurricane in North Carolina a couple of weeks before the election and everybody throws down and says, what do you need? You need people, you need equipment, like, we're in this together. So participate. And sometimes it's you learning stuff, and sometimes it's you learning from others, you know.
And I will sort of piggyback on what Carolina said a little bit. Like, my big thing has always been, whenever I've spoken at Election Center or wherever, I'm like, help me help you. If you're doing something, tell me about it, because I'm more than happy to write about it and then put it out there to the 5,000 plus subscribers on a Thursday in the weekly. A lot of them are elections officials, but there's also a lot of media people out there, and so that are on that list, and so they see things and they know what you're doing. So it's always a big, I can find things and that sort of thing, but it's always great if you're doing something really, like, my favorite thing from last year was the ride along program in San Benito County in California. I was like, because I've done a police ride along myself in another part of my life, not in the back of the car. Well, I was in the back of the car, but not for bad reasons. I was able to open the back door. But no, that was an amazing thing to sort of see how they did that. And that's where they got that idea, was from doing police ride-alongs. And then they sort of extrapolated it out to doing election ride-alongs. And I mean, but if you're doing something cool like that, let me know. I'd love to write about those. That goes back to my county news bones, where counties pretty much do everything. And so I like to write about that sort of stuff. So help me, always help me help you. And then that gets out to other folks.
Yeah, I think, just building on what they've said, I think what's helpful is that I didn't know all that I didn't know when I started, right? And so, but what's great is to just dive in, and by being connected with the Alliance, right? The U.S. Alliance for Elections Excellence, and being a part of this Centers for Elections Excellence, like Carolina mentioned, Clark County. We literally have yellow stanchions in our election operations center that we copied from it was like, oh, right. I mean, just simple things like upping your color coding game, just constantly learning, because in this profession, there are very limited professional development opportunities if you do not engage in this, right? And then there's the benefit. I mean, I hope that my managers who are on this call, and others, because we helped shape a lot of the standards and values that the Alliance has lifted up for the whole profession. And it's awesome to see our work reflected in that, like, to be a part of developing that. I hope helps people feel proud to be a part of this work, right? And so, I think that, because it's, yes, I wish the rose petals. I will let you know if that ever happens. But my brother did drop off flowers at my office last week. Nice guy. But I do think that you need to think about the social emotional ways that we can help each other, because this work is hard. And so I think there are little things, big and small, to the point that you don't change 400 things in one election, or you shouldn't. Who knows what the future brings? But I think that it's important to, kind of, my parenting philosophy has always been, catch your kids doing things right. And so I think when you can recognize what you're doing well and what other people are doing well, and how you can continue to improve together, that can be a really extraordinary experience. And so, and certainly, we do a lot of sharing and a lot of visiting. Very simple idea. Our neighbors, Alameda County, they have one of their seasonal temporary workers, or a couple of them, that are assigned to escort their observers. We had never thought to make that like a defined job. It had just been the thing that senior leaders just had to add, right? I spent 90 minutes the day before the primary with one particular person, asking me a million questions, like, oh, I just want to hang out. I'm like, no, you can't be unescorted in my office. So no, I can't go do my job because you're here. And it was like, oh, wow. Okay. So, there's just, because there are thousands of details that have to be correct and you have to get right and to make an election successful, I think it's just really important to offer those good ideas, and to borrow the good ones. And I love that Mindy mentioned Francisco's ride along program. It's awesome. So yeah.
I love that you mentioned the tours that PLEJ Election Center, the Alliance, that have been facilitated. I kind of feel like whenever I go on one of those, it's like going to a friend's house when you were a kid and seeing, oh wow, Jimmy has a PlayStation. I need to go home. And I know that no election officials are asking for PlayStations, but kind of the same thread of, oh, look what's happening. This is cool. You can play Madden on this thing. Yeah, I really like the point about the tours because I think there's so much value in those. Turning back to communications, I think more specifically, Kristin, you mentioned your newsletter that you all put out. And I think one of the difficult things for election officials to do, or it has been a difficult thing, is recognizing that there is interest in the process and there's interest in elections, even when there's not an election going on. So
Yes.
being consistent with those newsletters, consistently, telling your story, even when there's not an election, I think there's huge value in that. Are there things that, and I'm looking at Carolina and Mindy as well, thinking about this year where by and large there's not any major elections, what are the things that folks should be focusing on with the goal of building resilience in your office?
So one of the things that I was really impressed by, and maybe Kristin can back me up on this, I obviously followed everybody's like social media just because I was in awe at what you all were doing. One particular county in California, Orange County, Bob Page, he had what Kristin was describing, high value short videos, right? And every day, if you just go on his LinkedIn page or his county's LinkedIn page, there was a video of like, this is what my team is doing. And this is why the LNA, forget the name. What we're doing is making sure that the equipment works. If you meant to vote for TJ, it's a vote for TJ, right? And those videos went on for like a month after the election, even when the cameras had gone away. So my humble recommendation to you is if you don't have, if you don't have like a full communications department, if your county doesn't give you the budget for a full communications, hire somebody who understands TikTok or has a phone handy and a little, halo light, and just record very quick 30-second videos on like, and this is what we do with training, and this is what we do when we get the ballot, and and then just collect that data and use it in little bites. Because you know what? Folks generally, and to Kristin's point earlier, folks really trust their elections official. They, sometimes depending on the election of the outcome, they feel differently about the election space, but boy, do they trust Kristin. Boy, do they trust their local elections official. You are the face, your team is the face, you're in the community, you're at, community events, and you're the ones answering. But sometimes we get a little wonky in our text, right? Per statute X, I'm supposed to do this. And people are like, I have no idea what you said. What we're saying is we made sure that every ballot counted. Okay, that I understand. So if you haven't already, just get B-roll of everything, even on your phone, whether your phone is 20 years old or 2 months old. And then you use that content to pump information about your office, even when there's no election. So people don't forget that you're there. So you don't get the comment that I used to get, which was, hey, Carolina, what do you do the other 364 days of the year? Are you like part-time? Like, no, if it's Tuesday, it's election day in my county. So that would be my humble advice.
And Carolina, I want just to interject briefly. I've seen research that actually doing those quick hit videos just on your phone, in some cases, and I'll share it in our thank you email if I can find it, is actually more trust building or builds more trust than sometimes doing a highly edited, like fancy 5-minute long video. And I think that's a really, like, not being able to do it all, not being able to do the fancy thing, it isn't an excuse for doing nothing. So I just want to drop that point in before Mindy or Kristin. Go
I see that Catherine McMullen is here, who's one of our members, who, by the way, like whipped up an amazing like how-to video, and like it was like a less than 60-second video. And she'll tell you that like it was really helpful for folks that are casual observers. They just need to understand the process. What we do is very prescriptive. We don't just wake up today and say, I think I'm going to, accept this ballot. Like there's so much information about how to get that ballot through the building, the custody, the process, the uploading, right? The outside folks don't really understand that, right? And so it doesn't have to be Canva. You don't have to be a Photoshop whiz. Just put little vignettes.
And I think too, to sort of follow up with what Carolina said, and I've thought about this a lot. I'm a cranky old Gen Xer, but I've worked a lot with younger people, and I think elections offices, I mean everyone, but elections offices really need to think generationally too, because your X and your boomer voters, they know how to put something in the mail, but your Gen Z and your Gen Alpha voters, soon to be Gen Alpha voters, have no idea about the mail. I mean, just the process of if you're a jurisdiction that requires a stamp, oh my goodness, where do you have to go to get a stamp? I mean, that's like a legit thing that they're like, where do I go to get a stamp? So I think when you're doing this communication stuff, I mean, you've got to, you know, there's so many opportunities out there, but you also have to think about a generation. I mean, you don't have to do the whole, like, I'm going to speak Gen Z and talk about brat summer and skibbity dibbity, but you do have to, you have to just sort of think process wise, what, you know, how the generations are different with how they do things. I think I think often about the future of vote by mail, because I'm like, you know, I think we've moved to it, and not because of, you know, the politics of it or whatever, but just because, you know, people don't use the mail as much, especially younger generations. So I do think about that a lot as we move forward. I mean, we saw in California and in Hawaii and Nevada and other places, signatures. I mean, people signing stuff, the younger generations don't write cursive, many of them, and so that's a whole other thing. So I just think it's very important as we go through these next years and we have some time to think about this a bit generationally as well.
Yeah, create content and I think to talk about all that stuff, right? I mean, our voter services team never stops working, right? It's about updating the roles. There could be so much content created, and we've done it around, this is a great time to update your signature with us. You know, as I'm out there talking to Kiwanis groups and Rotarians, and they're like, my signature is very different than it used to be. And so I'm like, great. And we want to see it. So I think, you know, the work never stops, and it's important to keep telling that story.
That's excellent. I want to just tell everybody in the audience, we will have a short amount of time at the end for questions. So if you want to put anything in the Q&A, please do so. My final question before we move on to Q&A from the audience, thinking about the future of election administration, thinking about the future of election administration communications more specifically, what's something that gives you hope? Looking at everybody, what is something you're excited about, something that gives you hope?
I mean, 2024 gave me hope, because as did, to be honest, so did 2020, because my election day in 2020 was boring because things went well. Election day this year was very busy because so many people were writing about things that hadn't been writing about it in the past, but it was relatively boring. I mean, the bomb threats aside, which was a huge issue, I mean, it was by and large a boring election from a perspective of somebody who's been doing it for a while. And I think that gives me hope, is that, you know, regardless of the outcomes, people have seen that it's not exciting, which is good. The lack of excitement is good. And so the fact that things went so well in 2020 and in 2024, things were even better. I think that gives me hope for moving forward. It really does.
I think for me, what gives me hope is the level of in-depth knowledge that reporters actually had, the interest that they had. I can't tell you, like 10 years ago, when people would come to a logic and accuracy test, the reporter, who by the way had come to 73 prior logic and accuracy tests, would ask me, what are we doing here? And what does that mean? You know, and they weren't getting it. And the fact that when they came now, they knew more about technology and the processes and the variations between states. It tells me that at least we're speaking with a mouthpiece that is willing to do the work to understand our work. And how do we keep them engaged? But the hope is that their interest, and the better that they understand what we do, hopefully, the better balanced the articles, you know, that they're going to do, and maybe just the better reach we'll have with voters who don't speak elections, who vote maybe once every 4 years or one every 8 years. So that gives me hope. There's some work for us to do, but that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think, you know, we got 144 earned media stories about Contra Costa Trust and elections in local, state. I was worried about being cranky in the New York Times because they were kind of implying my team wasn't working hard enough. I was like, I can't talk to the media anymore until the weekend because I need a break. But I definitely want to plus one what Carolina said, because so I interacted with all these reporters during 2024, and some of them rolled up and like, oh yeah, I studied political science as an undergrad and I know about this, and let me tell, and asking really technical questions and showing that they actually really understand our process. And so, and working with us to go out and see a polling place and go see, we had unexpectedly high turnout at our regional early voting sites. We're still a polling place county in California. So, but we opened some early voting sites, one in each supervisorial district, and only hundreds of voters, low hundreds, voted in March in person, and we had 6,600 people show up at these different, and it was like, oh wow, okay. And it is inspiring because, elections, and again, I can't say enough good things about my team. I'm inspired because people are still at it. People have worked in my office for years and years and years, and haven't left yet. And so, and that kind of flew in the face. There was a national story that I was one of 3 registrars included in a national story about how 54% of California voters were in an jurisdiction with a new elections official. And, she looked at me and she was like, oh, you're new, but this guy's not, and this person's not, and and I was like, yes, that is true. I bring the enthusiasm and I'm learning a ton and I buy the donuts, but these guys are here and they're not leaving. And that gives me hope. So, between a media that is interested and willing, and so I am committed to continuing to produce content that is of interest.
That's excellent. I'm gonna put in the chat now several resources from Carolina's already shared the ones from the Partnership for Large Election Jurisdictions. I'm sharing a resource from the Center for Tech and Civic Life on building media relations, and then I'm sharing to the elections group's communications page. If anybody has any questions before we end, please put those in the chat. I just underline, there's lots of organizations. Carolina leads one. Mindy is the editor for an excellent. Oh, we got a question, so I can quit stalling. All right. Does anybody? Here we go. Do you have any best practices? This is probably pointed at Kristin or Carolina. Any best practices for improving services to UOCAVA voters?
I want to say I've seen a good resource from the EAC, which is just more guidelines. Happy to look. That's a great one.
And we're happy to reach out separately.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. I will tell you there were pain points, right, with the FVAP system not working the way that it should. And, my counterpart in Nevada County actually went to court so that 13 additional UOCAVA voters' ballots would get counted because they did everything right on their side. And we're working on, side note, we're working on trying to change the law in California so we can join those, whatever, 27 states that have a secure portal to accept, accept the ballots back, because, there are lots of places where there's no access to a fax machine. So that's a problem in California. So we're trying to fix that. But yeah, no, I would point to what, Carolina just mentioned in terms of the EAC, but.
And also I think, and this is really funny because I have several friends who are UOCAVA voters. My sister was a UOCAVA voter for years and she was always convinced that her ballot she returned it, was always convinced it never got counted. Because this was like pre-tracking, that sort of thing. She was always just like, oh, I know. So, but I think, and I ran into, what county is San Jose?
Santa Clara.
Santa Clara, thank you. So she was a Santa Clara County voter and had moved to London, and she's like, well, do I have to put postage on the ballot? Do I have to put local postage? And so she messaged me about it, asking me about it. And I'm like, and I had to sort of dig through and find stuff. So I think, even if you don't have a lot of UOCAVA voters there, I would say put that information somewhere easy for them to find on your website, because it did take me a minute to try and figure out, well, does she have to put British, United Kingdom postage on it just to get it, out, because she wasn't using the pouch and that sort of thing. So I think, as with all of this stuff, the more information you can give people up front, that's fewer phone calls that you're going to get, that's fewer emails that you're going to get. So that would be my advice, is just put as much of that information out there as you possibly can.
Yeah. And similarly, You know, I have a good friend who's that votes from Australia. And so I'm sure my staff thought it was a pain in their butt. They'd be like, okay, so we need to check up on, like, I've been contacted. Let's just, where are we at? Like, how's it going? Can we track this ballot, please? And make sure that, that it's all taken care of. So, but it, you know, it's important.
I appreciate, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I will also say that as we travel the country, we talk to different folks on how they handle UOCAVA voters, and PLEJ does not endorse one vendor or another, but I do understand that there's technology, and depending on the statutes in your state, you can either send voters a ballot and they can print it, fill it out, scan it, and fax it back. In other states, you're allowed to return the digital copy, and it can be transposed into like a regular ballot stock, so you don't have to duplicate it. So if anybody wants to get like technical on like which process makes the most sense given your legal structure, happy to connect you with some of those folks that I've been talking to. But there's opportunities. Question is, what's legal in your state?
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated that that Mindy got a question from her sister about an election process, because I feel like we've probably all experienced this, where if you work in elections, then you're the person that they go to, regardless of where they live. I know the elections group will sometimes get emails to our inbox, and it's a voter saying, hey, I live in such and such place. Where do I go to vote? So I'll get on the phone. I'll call the election official. Be like, hey, here's this person's phone number. Let's please help them. Please, please, please. So I'm sure Mindy's had many of those experiences, and I'm sure Carolina has as well.
I'm a delight at a cocktail party, let me tell you. People are like, oh, geez.
Well, without any further questions from the audience, I think I'm going to take this opportunity to close us out, to thank Mindy, Kristin, and Carolina for joining us again, and hopefully to the audience having a really fruitful and valuable conversation. I encourage folks in the audience, if you have any questions about anything elections related, reach out to the elections group, reach out to Carolina, reach out to Mindy, reach out to Kristin. We'd happily route those requests as we get them. Thank you for joining us. The elections group will continue to have webinars like this on a regular schedule. So if we don't see you again, thank you so much. And again, thank you to our panelists.